The city knew him as a legend. His name appeared on towering buildings, glossy magazines, and charity banners hung for cameras. He was a billionaire who had risen from nothing, or so the story said. People spoke of his discipline, his sharp mind, and his fearless decisions. In boardrooms, his presence silenced arguments. In public, his smile inspired awe. Many admired him. Some feared him. Very few truly knew him. He lived at the top of the city, in a glass mansion that overlooked endless lights. From his windows, the world looked small and distant, like something he had already conquered. Every morning followed the same pattern: quiet halls, polished floors, assistants waiting, cars ready. His life ran like a perfect machine, yet inside him, something was slowly breaking. Despite the noise of success around him, his days felt empty. His phone rang often, but rarely with voices that cared about him as a person. Meetings filled his hours, but none filled his heart. Friends were replaced by partners, family by contracts, celebrations by numbers on a screen. At night, when the city slept, he often stood alone by the window. The lights below reminded him of stars, beautiful, unreachable, cold. In those moments, a weight settled in his chest, a quiet sadness he never spoke about, a feeling money had failed to erase. He told himself this was the price of greatness. He believed strongly in one idea: the world rewarded the strong and punished the careless. To him, struggle was a choice. Poverty was the result of bad decisions. He had repeated this belief so often that it felt like truth. It made his success feel earned and justified. But deep down, another truth waited in silence. Sometimes, without warning, memories surfaced. Faces from long ago. A woman's tired eyes. A promise never kept. These thoughts came like shadows, slipping into his mind when he least expected them. He always pushed them away. He told himself the past was dead, buried, irrelevant. Yet his success had been built during a time when someone else had lost everything. He avoided thinking about that chapter of his life, about the choices he made when ambition mattered more than people, about the moment he walked away instead of looking back. The guilt was too heavy, so he locked it away behind achievements and applause. The world praised him, and he let it. But the silence inside his mansion told a different story. Meals were served by staff who barely knew him. Rooms echoed when he walked through them. His wealth bought comfort, not warmth. Power, not peace. Every success added another layer to the wall around his heart. He told himself he was fulfilled. He told himself this was enough. Then, one ordinary morning, something small disrupted his perfect routine. His car took a different route through the city due to roadwork. The familiar streets of glass and steel slowly faded, replaced by cracked roads and forgotten corners. He barely noticed at first, focused on his phone, his schedule, his plans. But as the car slowed near an industrial area, a strange unease crept in. Outside the window, the city looked different, rougher, poorer, real. He glanced up, just for a moment, and felt something stir inside him, not yet understanding why. Not yet knowing that this slight change in direction would lead him to a truth he had spent a lifetime avoiding. The car continued forward, carrying a man who had everything toward a place where nothing was left. And with that turn, the quiet walls around his heart began to crack. The car slowed as it moved farther away from the clean streets of the city. Tall buildings disappeared behind clouds of dust and smoke. The air grew thick, heavy with a sharp smell that burned the nose. Piles of waste rose like broken hills, stretching as far as the eye could see. This was the dump site, a place the city pretended did not exist. The billionaire looked out the window, uneasy. This land was not meant for living. It was meant for forgetting. Garbage trucks moved in and out, dropping their loads with loud crashes. Plastic bags fluttered in the wind like wounded birds. Smoke curled up from small fires burning beneath the trash. The ground was dark and uneven, soaked with filth and decay. No trees, no beauty, no mercy. Then he saw her. At first, she looked like part of the trash itself, small, bent, almost invisible. But as the car rolled closer, her shape became clear. An old woman stood near a fresh pile of waste, her thin body wrapped in torn clothes that once had color. Her hair was gray and tangled, her face lined with deep marks of age and hardship. She moved slowly, painfully, as if every step cost her strength. With shaking hands, she searched through the garbage. She picked up a piece of discarded food, half-eaten, dirty, thrown away without a thought. She wiped it against her clothes, hesitated for a second, then ate it. The billionaire felt his chest tighten. He had seen poverty before, on screens, in reports, in charity meetings. But this was different. This was raw, real, too close. The old woman sat down on the ground, surrounded by waste, chewing slowly. Her hands trembled. Her back curved forward, carrying the weight of many years. She did not rush. She did not cry. She ate with quiet focus, as if this moment was all that mattered. There was something about her that felt wrong and powerful at the same time. Despite the filth around her, she tried to stay clean. She carefully placed the food on a piece of cardboard instead of the ground. When the wind blew dust toward her face, she turned away, protecting herself as best she could. There was pain in her body, but dignity in her movements. She was not begging, not calling for help, just surviving. The billionaire swallowed hard. His first instinct was to look away, to return to his phone, to remind himself this was not his world, not his problem. But his eyes refused to leave her. A strange discomfort crawled through him, something between shame and fear. His mind tried to protect him with excuses. The same old thoughts returned. People end up here because of their choices. Life is hard, but everyone has chances. Yet those words felt weak now. This woman did not look careless. She looked broken by time, worn down by life, forgotten. The car stopped. The driver glanced back, unsure why they had paused. The billionaire said nothing. His heart beat faster, louder than the noise outside. He felt exposed, as if the walls he built around himself had suddenly fallen. He watched as the woman struggled to stand again. Her knees shook. She leaned on a stick she had found among the trash. For a moment, it seemed she might fall. She steadied herself and continued searching, step by step. Each movement told a story of endurance. He felt an urge to escape, to order the driver to move, to leave this place and its discomfort behind. This scene did not belong in his world of clean suits and glass offices. It threatened something inside him. But another feeling rose stronger. Curiosity. Why was she here? How long had she lived like this? Where was her family, her home, her past? For the first time in years, he felt truly unsettled, not by markets or money, but by a single human life. The car remained still. He did not step out. He did not speak. He simply watched. And as he watched, he sensed that this woman, this forgotten soul among the garbage, was not just a stranger. She was a mirror reflecting a truth he had buried long ago. He stayed, choosing, for once, not to turn away. The billionaire remained seated in the car long after it should have moved on. His eyes stayed fixed on the old woman. At first, he told himself it was simple shock. Anyone would feel disturbed by such a sight. Yet the longer he watched her, the stronger a strange feeling grew inside him, an ache he could not explain. There was something about her. It was not her poverty. It was not the dirt or the torn clothes. It was the way she paused before eating, as if remembering a time when meals were shared, not stolen from trash. It was the way she folded the small piece of cloth she carried, carefully placing it beside her before sitting down. That small habit struck him deeply. He had seen that gesture before. His chest tightened. His mind resisted, but memories slipped through like water through cracked stone. A kitchen long ago. A woman folding cloth with care, even when there was little else to care for. A soft voice reminding him to be patient, to be kind. He shook his head slightly, trying to clear the thoughts. This is nothing, he told himself. Just coincidence. But the feeling refused to leave. As the car finally moved forward, he asked the driver to slow down near the edge of the dump site. He leaned forward, watching the woman from a distance. She stood again, leaning on her stick, and walked toward another pile of waste. Her steps were slow, measured, familiar in a way that unsettled him. His heart beat faster. That night, back in his glass mansion, sleep avoided him. The image of the old woman followed him into the darkness. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing the echo of her movements in his mind. The city lights outside his window no longer comforted him. For the first time in years, the past knocked loudly. He remembered faces he had buried under success. A childhood filled with struggle. A time when hunger was not a story, but a daily fear. He remembered promises whispered in moments of desperation. Promises to never forget where he came from. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten. The next day, he returned to the area. This time, he did not go in his usual car. He dressed simply, without the symbols of wealth that followed him everywhere. He stayed at a distance, blending into the edge of the scene like a shadow. The old woman was there again. She arrived early, before the trucks, as if she knew the rhythm of this place by heart. She moved with quiet purpose, ignoring the noise and danger around her. Other scavengers passed her by, some younger, stronger, faster. No one spoke to her. No one helped her. She was invisible. He watched as she waited patiently for the trucks to unload. When food appeared, she did not rush. She picked only what she could carry. Never more. Never less. There was a quiet rule she followed, one shaped by years of survival. His curiosity deepened, mixing with a growing fear. He spoke quietly to a worker nearby, careful not to draw attention. From scattered answers and tired voices, a rough picture formed. The woman had been coming to the dump site for years. No one knew her full name. Some said she had once lived nearby. Others said she had lost everything long ago. Years. The word echoed in his mind. Years of hunger. Years of cold nights. Years of being unseen. And no one had helped her. As he learned more, a heavy truth pressed down on him. This was not a temporary fall. This was a slow erasure. A life fading quietly while the city moved on. He felt something break inside him. That evening, alone in his office, he opened old files and records he had avoided for decades. He did not know what he was looking for, only that he could no longer ignore the pull of the past. Names, dates, places stared back at him like ghosts. The old woman's face appeared again in his mind. Her tired eyes felt familiar now, not as a stranger's, but as someone tied to his earliest memories. Someone who had stood behind him before he learned to stand alone. Someone who had given when she had nothing left. Fear wrapped around his curiosity. If he kept searching, he might find answers he was not ready to face. Answers that could tear down the story he had built about himself. Yet turning away no longer felt possible. As the pieces slowly connected, a terrifying thought formed. Soft at first, then impossible to ignore. This woman was not just another victim of poverty. She was part of his story. And the truth, once buried, was beginning to breathe again. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, like dirt being brushed away from something long buried. The billionaire began searching quietly. He did not announce his interest. He did not send teams or lawyers. He listened. He watched. He asked careful questions of people who were usually ignored. Old workers, street vendors, guards who had stood in the same place for years. Piece by piece, a life began to form. Long before the dump site, the old woman had lived a simple life. She was not born poor, but she was never rich. She worked with her hands and her heart. She cooked, cleaned, stitched clothes, and cared for others. Her home was small, but warm. There was laughter in it once. There was purpose. She had raised a child on hope and sacrifice. People who remembered her spoke of a woman who never complained. She took extra work when others rested. She skipped meals so her child could eat. She believed that hard work would protect them both. That love was enough to build a future. For a time, it seemed she was right. Then came the turning point, the moment that broke everything. A powerful company arrived in her neighborhood, promising jobs and development. Papers were signed that few understood. Words like progress and opportunity were spoken loudly, while warnings were whispered or ignored. The land she lived on was suddenly no longer hers. She fought back the only way she knew how, by begging for time, by asking questions, by trusting promises made by men in clean suits. But promises were broken. Deadlines passed. Notices arrived. One day, her door was marked. Soon after, it was gone. Her home disappeared under machines and dust. With nowhere to go, she moved from place to place. Friends helped at first, but help grows thin when hardship lasts too long. Bills piled up. Her health began to fail. Each loss made the next one easier for the world to accept. She became invisible. The systems meant to protect people like her turned cold and silent. Offices sent her away. Files went missing. Rules were used against her. Without money or power, her voice carried no weight. And then came the deepest wound. Her child, the reason she had endured everything, was pulled away by circumstances she could not control. Education, opportunity, ambition, forces that promised a better future but demanded distance. She let go because she believed it was for the best. That was the last real choice she made. From there, the fall was slow but steady. Illness weakened her. Shelter became uncertain. Pride kept her from begging. Hunger taught her where to look when others looked away. Years passed. Trash became her market. Leftovers became meals. Cardboard became shelter. The dump site became home. As the billionaire uncovered these details, each fact struck him like a blow. This was not laziness. This was not poor choice. This was a life crushed by decisions made far above her head. Decisions made in boardrooms. Decisions that had made someone else rich. Late one night, alone in his office, the final connection surfaced. A project from his early career. His first major success. Land acquired cheaply. Neighborhoods cleared quickly. Profits celebrated loudly. He stared at the old documents, his hands shaking. The dates matched. The place matched. Her loss aligned perfectly with his rise. What he had once called smart business now showed another face. Every step forward he had taken had pushed someone else backward. While he climbed into comfort, she slipped into survival. Her suffering had paid for his success. The weight of that truth pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. All his life, he had believed his wealth was built on discipline and vision alone. Now he saw the hidden cost. The lives erased, the voices silenced, the sacrifices never honored. The old woman at the dump site was no longer just a stranger. She was a witness, a living reminder of what ambition without mercy leaves behind. As dawn approached, the billionaire closed the file and sat in silence. Outside, the city began to wake, unaware of the truth uncovered in the dark. And somewhere among the garbage, an old woman prepared for another day, still carrying the pain that had built another man's comfort. The past was no longer buried. It was waiting. The billionaire sat alone in his office, the city lights casting long shadows across the polished floor. Papers were scattered across his desk, files he had long avoided, documents he had thought irrelevant. Yet tonight, he could no longer ignore them. He held one sheet in his hand, eyes scanning the names, dates, and addresses. His pulse quickened with a strange mix of fear and anticipation. Something in these old records tugged at him, a thread connecting the life of the old woman at the dump site to his own past. At first, he resisted seeing the truth. He told himself it was coincidence, a random alignment of dates and locations. But as he read further, the pattern became undeniable. The land she once called home, the neighborhood that had disappeared under construction, the promises that had been broken, they all matched a project he had overseen in the earliest days of his career. A deal that brought him recognition, wealth, and the first taste of power. But it had cost her everything. His hands trembled as he connected the dots. Every decision he had celebrated, every contract, every triumph, had come at her expense. While he climbed higher, she had fallen further. The truth hit him like a punch to the chest. This woman, the frail, tired figure he had seen eating scraps of food, was tied directly to his rise. He had benefited from the loss, the displacement, the suffering that had erased her home, her dignity, even her family. Guilt surged through him in waves. He pressed his palms against his face, breathing heavily. How had he not seen this before? How had ambition blinded him to the human cost of his choices? Luxury surrounded him. The finest office, the richest view, the comfort that money could buy. But the thought of her, alone, hungry, and forgotten, made those walls feel hollow. The air seemed heavy, thick with a weight that no wealth could lift. He remembered the first time he had walked through that neighborhood years ago. He remembered promises made by others, promises he had ignored, thinking they were minor, insignificant. He had turned a blind eye to suffering because it did not affect him directly. And now, the consequences were here, staring him in the face. He thought of her trembling hands, of her frail frame leaning on a stick to stand. He imagined the nights she had spent cold and alone, surviving on discarded scraps, invisible to the world. Every choice he had celebrated, every accolade he had received, had been built upon her pain. Shame burned in his chest, and with it came a sharp, unavoidable clarity. Success meant nothing if it required stepping over humanity. Money could buy comfort, influence, and luxury, but it could not undo a life destroyed. He sank into his chair, head bowed. He felt small in a way he never had before. For the first time, the power he had accumulated seemed meaningless. Titles and wealth did not absolve guilt. They did not erase the human cost of ambition. The realization gnawed at him, relentless and insistent. He had been proud of his achievements, of the empire he had built. But that pride now felt hollow, a mask covering the truth he could no longer deny. And in that quiet, heavy room, he made his first unspoken promise. He would confront the consequences of his actions, not for reputation, not for appearances, but because it was the only way to begin righting the wrongs that still lived among the discarded. Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware of the reckoning taking place within its brightest tower. Inside, a man who had everything felt the weight of what he had never wanted to see, the truth. No amount of wealth could rewrite the past. No achievement could erase the suffering he had caused. For the first time, he understood that real power was not in taking, it was in responsibility. And as he looked out the window, the faint memory of the old woman's eyes returned. Strong, determined, unbroken despite everything. The billionaire's chest tightened. He could no longer escape the truth. He had to face it. And with that, the first step toward redemption began. The billionaire stepped out of the car, the smell of smoke and decay hitting him immediately. Each footstep onto the uneven ground felt heavier than the last. Around him, the dump site stretched in all directions. Piles of trash, broken furniture, plastic fluttering like tattered flags, and the faint moans of stray animals. This was not a place for someone like him. And yet he had come. He saw her before she saw him. The old woman crouched near a pile of rotting food, carefully selecting what she could eat. Her movements were deliberate but slow, her frail body trembling as she balanced herself on a thin stick. Her clothes were tattered, stained from years of surviving the streets. Her hair, gray and matted, fell over her shoulders in uneven strands. For a long moment, he just watched. He had imagined this meeting countless times in his mind, how he would explain, how he could offer help. But now, standing here, surrounded by the raw reality of her life, all his rehearsed words vanished. They were useless. Money, power, influence, they could not fix what she had endured. She sensed him before he spoke. Her eyes, sharp despite age and suffering, flicked up. For a heartbeat, she froze, as if calculating whether he was a threat. There was caution in her gaze, layered with exhaustion and mistrust. Years of being ignored, dismissed, or hurt had taught her to protect herself. The billionaire stopped a few feet away, careful not to crowd her space. He did not reach for her or make sudden movements. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, powerless in a way he had never felt. Every step he had taken to accumulate wealth now seemed meaningless in the face of her suffering. He felt the imbalance sharply. His suit, his shoes, his car, all symbols of success, meant nothing here. Here, in the midst of garbage and decay, his wealth could not buy trust, nor could it erase years of pain. His pride, once so firmly held, felt fragile and small. The old woman shifted, gripping her stick tighter. She studied him quietly, suspicion mingled with faint curiosity. The world had treated her cruelly, and strangers rarely brought kindness. She had learned not to hope, not to trust. He lowered his gaze, letting her take in his presence without pressure. He wanted her to see him not as a man of power, but as someone who had finally come to witness her life, to recognize her suffering. Minutes passed in silence, each one stretching longer than the last. He noticed the lines etched into her face, the deep furrows of age, the wear of hardship, the stubborn resilience. Her hands shook as she rested them on her knees, not from fear of him, but from the exhaustion of survival. In that quiet moment, he understood something vital. Helping her would not be easy. It would not be a simple gesture, a check, or a donation. Healing the wounds of a lifetime would require patience, humility, and courage, qualities he had never tested outside the boardroom. Then, a subtle change happened. Her eyes, still cautious, softened slightly. Something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, not of his name, not yet, but of what he represented, the force that had shaped her suffering, but also, potentially, the means of her redemption. He felt the weight of that acknowledgement pressing down on him, heavier than any business failure, sharper than any financial loss. It demanded accountability, presence, and humility. He could not erase the past, but he could face it. He took a small step closer, careful to maintain the space she needed. His voice remained silent. Words could wait. Actions would matter more. And in that moment of shared understanding, the billionaire realized that power meant nothing without empathy, and money meant nothing without conscience. She, a fragile figure surrounded by garbage, held the truth he had been avoiding for decades. She met his gaze for a second longer, and in that brief connection he saw a spark of recognition, an understanding that their lives were linked, whether he was ready to admit it or not. He stood there, silent, humbled, and fully aware of the chasm that separated wealth and pain. And yet, for the first time, he felt the possibility of crossing it. The billionaire left the dump site that day with a weight he could not shed. Every step back to his car was heavy, as if the ground itself remembered the suffering he had ignored. The city sparkled around him, indifferent to the reckoning that had begun inside one man's heart. But he could no longer pretend that wealth alone was enough. The first step was acknowledgement. He did not rush to give money or fame. He did not offer gestures that could be mistaken for pity. He wanted responsibility, not applause. He began quietly, arranging basic necessities for the old woman: blankets, food, medical care. Not gifts, but tools to restore what had been stolen from her. Yet even these small acts were met with resistance. Some of his colleagues laughed behind closed doors. "She's just a street dweller," they said. "Why waste resources?" Friends he had once trusted questioned his judgment, but he ignored them. He knew this was not a matter of business, but of conscience. The old woman, however, was harder to reach. She regarded his efforts with suspicion, even anger. She had lived decades being disappointed by promises, betrayed by the very systems that were supposed to protect her. Trust was not given freely, it was earned. Every meal or blanket he brought was met with a quiet refusal, a look that said, "You do not know me, nor my pain." He felt the sting of rejection. For a man used to control, to results, it was unfamiliar and humbling. Money could buy many things, but not respect, not forgiveness, not healing. Still, he persisted, not because he wanted recognition, but because he could no longer ignore the truth he had uncovered. He began visiting quietly, sitting at the edge of her space without intruding. Sometimes he brought supplies. Other times he simply sat in silence, allowing her presence to exist without judgment. Each encounter tested him. Pride whispered that he was already helping enough. Impatience urged him to demand gratitude. But slowly, the rigidity of his past began to melt. He realized that true redemption was not about control or fixing someone's life in a single act. It was about presence, patience, and humility. Outside forces resisted him too. Investors questioned his absence from key meetings. Partners doubted his priorities. Society, as always, was blind to her suffering. Yet, he no longer measured success by approval or profit. He measured it by a quiet transformation inside himself. the shift from pride to service, from ambition to accountability. Days became weeks. Slowly, the old woman allowed small openings. A shared cup of tea, a word barely spoken, a glance that carried the weight of recognition. She did not forgive him fully. She was not yet ready, but she no longer turned away. That was enough for the billionaire to understand that redemption could not be rushed. Forgiveness, like trust, had its own pace. He began to see the changes in himself, too. Nights no longer ended with empty reflection on achievements. Instead, he carried the image of her resilience with him, allowing it to guide decisions both in business and in life. The need for dominance gave way to empathy. The desire for recognition was replaced by responsibility. And slowly, fragile as it was, healing began, not in grand gestures, not in headlines, but in quiet moments of mutual acknowledgement. A blanket placed without expectation, a chair offered without demand, eyes meeting, unguarded for a brief second, bridging years of suffering and neglect. The billionaire knew the road ahead was long. He could not erase decades of pain with a single act. He could not reclaim what had been lost, but he could walk beside her now, however slowly, with accountability, humility, and care. For the first time in his life, he understood that redemption was not about undoing the past. It was about carrying it responsibly and allowing others to heal on their own terms. As he left the dump site that evening, the sun dipping behind piles of discarded life, he did not feel victorious. He did not feel pride. He felt something far rarer. The quiet stirring of conscience finally awakened, a fragile but unwavering step toward a life rebuilt. Not for him, but for those he had once overlooked. The first time she smiled at him without suspicion, it was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The old woman had lived decades in shadow, unseen, ignored, surviving in a world that had discarded her. Now, slowly, she began to reclaim herself. Her small living space, once a corner of the dump site, was now a modest, clean room. Blankets warmed her nights, food nourished her body, and a small garden outside her window reminded her that life could be gentle. Each day she moved a little taller, spoke a little louder, and let herself imagine a life beyond survival. Dignity, once stripped away, returned in quiet, powerful increments. The billionaire watched her transformation with awe and humility. He realized that all the years he had measured wealth in numbers, contracts, and possessions had blinded him to what truly mattered. True wealth was not the size of his bank account or the shine of his office. It was the difference he could make in another person's life, the ability to restore hope where despair had ruled for decades. Her presence changed him profoundly. Meetings that once revolved solely around profit now included conversations about responsibility, ethics, and the unseen costs of business decisions. Boardrooms became spaces where he advocated for fairness, transparency, and social impact. Colleagues sometimes questioned him, but he had learned that real influence required more than money. It required conscience. He initiated programs to help others who, like her, had been erased by society. Shelters were improved, access to health care increased, and opportunities for work and education expanded for the forgotten. He did not seek recognition for these actions. He understood that true change came quietly, through persistence and care. Forgiveness between him and the old woman did not come overnight. It was not demanded, and it was not total. She had endured too much for a simple pardon. But she allowed him to be present, to share responsibility, and to witness her recovery. Her forgiveness was not a clean slate. It was a release, a bridge built slowly, step by step. The billionaire felt his own burdens lighten. The guilt that had haunted him for years now transformed into action. He realized that at every stage, his choices could either harm or heal. He chose to heal. In the evenings, they would sit together quietly, not speaking much, just sharing space. Sometimes, she hummed a soft tune, a melody that reminded him of childhood warmth and lost innocence. Sometimes, he simply watched her, learning patience and humility. Words were not always necessary. Presence itself became the most profound form of communication. The city outside continued to hum, indifferent as always, but within his home, and in her restored life, something lasting had begun. He no longer measured his success by how many zeros filled a bank statement. He measured it by the lives uplifted, the hope restored, and the dignity returned. One afternoon, as they looked out the window at a park where children played freely, he felt the truth settle deeply within him. Wealth was not what he had once thought. True wealth was measured in human connection, in service, in the courage to face wrongdoing and choose compassion instead of pride. He thought of the years he had wasted chasing the wrong kind of success. He thought of the old woman's resilience, her silent strength, and her unwavering spirit. And he understood that his legacy would no longer be built on buildings, contracts, or accolades. It would be built on lives changed, justice restored, and compassion shared. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in warm gold, he sat quietly beside her. They did not speak. Words were not necessary. In that moment, the old woman, once lost among trash, and the billionaire, once lost in pride, had both discovered something greater than wealth. True wealth, he finally knew, was measured not in money, but in love, dignity, and the courage to make the world a better place for those who had been left behind. And in that shared silence, a new life began, for her, for him, and for all the lives they had yet to touch.